We've covered multiple cases on this channel where authorities have caused irreparable damage to an investigation and prevented justice from being served. But this is the worst one yet. A domestic terrorist who went uncaught for years, free to continue his bombings and kill as many innocent people as possible, all of which could have been prevented if the FBI had done their job in the first place. But to fully understand how the FBI let people die, we need to start from the beginning. The Olympics, a suspicious bag, and a hero who may not have been a hero. Let's get into it. In order to make this video and all the other ones on this channel, it takes at least 6 people working full-time over multiple weeks. Without sponsors, this would be impossible. So we'd like to take this moment to thank this video's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, and congratulate them in celebrating their 7th year this month. They have lots of goodies for new and existing players to celebrate if you use our link, and use promo code RAID7, you'll get Pelops the Victor. Oh, and be sure to wait for our promo codes at the end for some goodies, like brews. Raid Shadow Legends has been around for a long time, and it's for a reason. AAA graphics, amazing combat, and so many cool champions. If you click on our link to download the game, you get a $200 anniversary package for free. That's right, Raid is celebrating its 7th anniversary, and by clicking through our link only, you'll get legendary champion Krok'mar the Devourer, plus all of this stuff on screen when you level up, including epic champion Galapo the Recluse if you reach level 25. But there's even more cool stuff, like limited time Assassin's Creed champions. You can get legendary Ezio for free by logging on for 7 days, and you can also unlock other iconic assassins like Edward Kenway, Bayek, Basim, and Kassandra by participating in special events, tournaments, and summon boosts. Plus, we've got some more great promo codes for more champions and even brews in-game, because it's my name. Also, if you're a new user, you can use one of these promo codes on screen, and current players can get some goodies and brews with promo code EPIRE. New users can use that one too after waiting 24 hours. Don't forget to click the link below and join my clan Legendary Brew so we can be legendary together. Now, onto the video. On July 26, 1996, the 7th day of the Atlanta Olympic Games, over 50,000 people gathered at Centennial Park. The R&B band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack were performing that night, and thousands of fans were packed in the space between the stage and the NBC Sound Tower, a 5-story, 40-foot-high scaffolding rig wired with speakers and lights. One song after another, people sang and danced together until it was time for the band's break around 12:30 a.m. At the same time, a security guard named Richard Jewell came out of one of the bathrooms and noticed 7 college-aged boys sitting on 2 of the 3 green benches in front of the NBC Sound Tower making a ruckus. Apart from their drunk antics, the guard noticed they had 2 large bags. One was clearly a cooler bag since they were pulling out fresh 12-ounce Budweisers from it, but the other was a large green Alice pack, pushed further under the left bench. He eventually left them and went back to his post by the entrance on the other side of the NBC tower. When Richard circled back to the same spot 20 minutes later, he saw that those young men had littered dozens of empty cans everywhere. Now that was crossing a line. Richard confronted the young men with limited success, so the security guard called the assistant commander of park security, Agent Tom Davis of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or GBI for short. "They won't listen to me. I need someone in law enforcement to talk to them," Richard complained to Tom. By the time they both returned to the location, half the guys had already dispersed into the large crowd, leaving behind only 2 who were now picking up the empty beer cans. But as soon as they saw the agent coming, they tried to flee as well to avoid getting in trouble. In their haste, however, they accidentally kicked the green Alice bag that was under the bench. Richard immediately noticed and called out to Tom. "Hey, Tom, they left out one of their bags right under that bench. How do you want to handle this situation?" The agent thought Richard was reading too much into it by labeling it a situation. For the past few weeks since the games had begun, there had been multiple reports of abandoned backpacks and people panicking, thinking it was something like an explosive device, but it never was. Tom and Richard decided to locate the green bag's owner. Finding no tags on it, they scanned the crowd and spotted 2 of the beer boys from before. "Did y'all leave a bag up here?" asked the agent. "No, it ain't ours." Tom thought someone else might have forgotten it. Not a big deal. But Richard wasn't letting it go. He pressed again. "What do you want to do about this situation?" Tom still thought the guard was overreacting. After all, Richard always took security a bit too seriously. Just days earlier, he'd been pestering the crew to seal the gaps around the sound cables by the tower so there would be no spots that someone could easily use to stash something dangerous. Still, protocol was protocol. So despite Tom's skepticism, at 12:57 a.m., he alerted the Centennial Park Command Center of a code 27, a suspicious package report. 1 minute later, a 911 dispatcher received a call. "There is a bomb in Centennial Park." You have 30 minutes. While there have been many false bomb threats in the past days, this one seemed different. The mystery caller wasn't frantic. Rather, he spoke plainly, as if stating a fact. FBI bomb technician Bill Forsyth was the one to respond to the call from Centennial Park, and he immediately gathered his ATF counterpart, Steve Zellers. The two were designated as the Assessment Team 33 and quickly weaved through the crowd towards the reported site. In the meantime, Richard rushed through the 5 levels of the NBC sound tower next to the bag to warn technicians and crew operating the park's lights, speakers, and cameras. It's a suspicious package. If I come back in here and tell you to get out, there will be no questions. There will be no hesitation. Drop what you're doing and get the out. But just like the agent, many had grown desensitized to bomb threats. Back on the ground, Richard, Tom, and the other officers tried to clear a 15-foot perimeter, but they couldn't push the people too hard. There were thousands of them, and a sudden bomb warning could cause panic or, worse, a stampede. The bomb assessment team finally arrived at 1:05 a.m., and Tom pointed both of them toward the toppled green bag. With a flashlight in his mouth, Bill Forsyth, the bomb technician, crawled under the bench for a closer inspection. Being on the assessment team, he wasn't supposed to open or peek inside the package. They are officially instructed to only maintain public safety by securing the perimeter and observing the package externally without touching any buckles or straps. Many times, explosives can be triggered by merely opening a package, so it's extremely risky. Still, that night, Bill listened to his gut and leaned in closer. The bag zipper wasn't fully closed. It was open just enough for him to take a peek. His face turned white. There were 3 pipe bombs, some of the largest he had ever seen, surrounded by several 3-inch-long masonry nails. Bill jumped back only to freeze again, as if waiting for something to happen. Seeing his partner's reaction, the other agent, Steve, immediately switched off his radio, and when he stepped back, refusing to even use his cell phone near the bag, that's when Richard knew something was seriously wrong. He said, "God, he don't even want to use a cell phone around it." If this exploded, nails would rip through the masses like crude bullets. 1:08 a.m., the bomb assessment agent, Steve, asked Tom for his cell phone and ran towards Techwood Drive to alert the Bomb Management Center at Dobbins Air Force Base. His call was registered under the code BMC number 104, making it the 104th bomb threat registered since the Olympic Games had begun. The base instantly dispatched a bomb defusal team to neutralize the threat, but it was at least a 20-minute drive from there to the park. 1:10 a.m., Richard sprinted through the NBC sound tower for a second time. "Get out! Get out now!" he yelled at the top of his lungs, forcing everyone to evacuate. Out in the crowd, several officers had joined in to expand the perimeter that Richard and Tom Davis had initially established. It was 1:15 a.m., and the bomb squad was still some time away. They managed to push back about 200 people, but there were still thousands of drunk, dancing, and singing people in that crowd. They were more focused on the "I Walked Alone" song being played by Jack Mack and the Heart Attack than the officers trying to push them away. People sitting on the benches near the tower were particularly stubborn. Some were drunk, while others refused to give up their seat, thinking it was just another false alarm. Officers had no choice but to form a human shield around them to protect them from any incoming shrapnel in case the bomb exploded. 1:19 a.m., the band finished their set and began making their way towards the exit. The chief commander of park security arrived at the scene, and Tom Davis informed him that the bomb squad was 11 minutes out. 20 feet away, the band stopped to take one last photograph, while the officers kept pushing people farther. But a minute later, when the clock hit 1:20 a.m., time ran out. A shockwave tore through Centennial Park, followed by a deafening bang, throwing people yards away within seconds. The air, which was once filled with music, was now overtaken by screams and the shrill whistle of shrapnel cutting through the smoke. Despite the officers' efforts, dozens were still caught in the blast. The pressure from the explosion slammed into Tom Davis with such force that he felt the heat of it on his back. One of the nails hit him, but it was luckily blocked by the GBI badge in his pocket. Richard Jewell was on the opposite side of the NBC tower when the detonation knocked him to his knees. He looked up and saw state troopers, men who had been standing guard seconds earlier, were now lying on the ground wounded. Richard ran to the first one he saw on the ground and urged him to, "Just lay flat, man. We'll get you some help, man." Paramedics arrived within minutes and began rushing the injured onto stretchers. There were dozens sprawled across the ground, moaning in pain. Nearby officers and bystanders turned into first responders, ripping their shirts for makeshift bandages to try to stop the bleeding. 44-year-old Alice Hawthorne had driven 3 hours just to spend some quality time with her teenage daughter at the concert. It was the girl's birthday present. She was struck by shrapnel 6 times. One hit her in the head. Tom knelt beside her to check her pulse, but there was nothing. He he saw another man close by, holding his hands over a wound in his abdomen. Meanwhile, when a Turkish cameraman, Mili Ozunyol, heard the blast, having experience with military conflicts, his first instinct was to document what was going on and ran towards the scene, but he collapsed from a heart attack. In a matter of seconds, Centennial Park had transformed from a celebration into a war zone. By sunrise the next day, those who had left the park early or had stayed in that night woke up to the nightmare that had unfolded. One Atlantan resident, Bill Cox Jr., shared his feeling with the Atlanta magazine. The city had been on a euphoric high because of the Olympics for weeks and weeks. The bombing was a sucker punch to the gut. I was outraged that someone would do that to the Olympics in my hometown. Authorities reported that over 111 people were injured, including 9 law enforcement officers, 6 state troopers, 2 Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents, and 1 Drug Enforcement Administration officer. The number of casualties did not go beyond the mother, Alice Hawthorne, and the cameraman, Malil Azunyol, who died on the way to the hospital. It was a national tragedy, but it could have been much worse. During a press conference, the security guard who first noticed the Alice bag, Richard Jewell, was given praise for his diligence and heroic actions, which led to many people being cleared out of harm's way. By that evening, news channels lined up to interview the hero who had potentially saved thousands of lives. CNN had first dibs with Richard. The security guard was escorted by AT&T's media relations director into the CNN center. There, they got Richard settled and told him to be ready in about 5 seconds. Richard had barely slept the past 24 hours and had never done anything like this before. He told them he was nervous, but in those 5 seconds, the only pep talk he got was, "Be yourself." A lifelong nobody from Habersham County was suddenly on global television. He was asked if he felt like a hero. He said, "No, ma'am. I feel like the person who did the job that I was supposed to do. I was in the right place at the right time, and used my training the way I was taught. The real heroes are the paramedics and the firemen and all the agents that placed themselves between the bomb and the people that were refusing to move. They took the most of the shrapnel." AT&T's media director later drove him to an FBI session in the morning for a 90-minute debrief, then back to CNN for longer interviews. Everywhere he went, people called him a hero. Some said he was the reason so many people were alive, and they weren't wrong. Over the next 24 hours, almost every national and local channel wanted an interview with Richard. When Richard came home a few days later, his mom told him how proud she was of him. In the grocery store and on the streets, people recognized and came up to him. Everyone wanted to know more about the Olympic hero, to learn about his life and ambitions, and what made him so brave in the face of danger. It was like a dream come true for a security guard who had always yearned for more. Before that night in Centennial Park, Richard Allensworth Jewell was just another face in the crowd. Born in 1962 in Danville, Virginia, and grew up in Georgia. His parents divorced when he was just 4, and from then on, he was raised alone by his mother, Bobby. He wasn't popular or confident as a kid, or even as an adult. Richard was always the quiet, overweight, and often overlooked one in the room. But despite all the bullying, he carried a big dream, to one day become a police officer. Richard studied law enforcement and took small security jobs, clinging to the hope that someday someone would see his dedication, and it looked like things were finally lining up for him. But everything came crashing down just 3 days later. On July 30th, around 3:30 p.m., the Atlanta Journal-Constitution published a special afternoon paper, an extra edition with an article co-written by Kathy Scruggs and Ron Martz. Minutes later, a CNN anchor held the front page headline up to the camera. FBI suspects hero guard may have planted bomb. Turns out, 3 days prior, on July 28th, when Richard shared his story on CNN, one viewer watching didn't believe a word coming out of the security guard's mouth. His name was Ray Clear, the president of Piedmont College, where Richard used to work before his Olympic gig. He immediately rang the FBI and told them he believed that Richard might have had something to do with the bombing. The president mentioned the guard's past record of improper conduct, as he phrased it, and vaguely referred to him stopping cars near campus on the highway for security checks. Although Ray never outright accused Richard of planting the bomb, he planted a seed of suspicion, and the timing couldn't have been more crucial. The Olympic Games gathered eyes from all across the globe, meaning the entire world was watching the FBI, waiting for an update. They were desperate for leads, and Ray's call had given them their first one. During an FBI conference call between Atlanta and Washington, Richard's name came up. The agents looked for motivation from other similar incidents. For instance, in 1984, a Los Angeles police officer named Danny Lee Bridges had planted a fake bomb at the Olympics, only to discover it later and gain recognition. And in 1988, a California volunteer firefighter named John Orr had secretly set fires across the state just so he could later extinguish them and be hailed as a savior. Jewel suddenly looked a lot less like a hero and more like a prime suspect. By Monday morning, on July 29th, the Bureau launched a preliminary investigation into Richard's background. Details began to line up, and not in Richard's favor. The detectives discovered that the guard had owned a Green Army backpack similar to the one used in the bombing and even had access to a bomb-making cookbook. There were also witnesses who claimed he was obsessed with wanting to be in the middle of anything that might happen at the Olympics. They further uncovered that Richard had previously trained with a bomb squad and was familiar with the construction of homemade pipe bombs, especially those packed with shrapnel. Another acquaintance of Richard reported that the guard's passion to join the force was amplified when he was blackballed during his time as a deputy sheriff for crashing his cop car 4 times while transporting prisoners. And just when they thought Richard's laundry list couldn't get longer, his record showed a prior arrest for impersonating an officer. A behavioral unit in Quantico began carefully studying his CNN interviews. They concluded that Richard was a classic fit for someone who might manufacture a crisis just to come out as the savior. Such psychological profiling tactics were taken seriously by the Bureau, as they had proven successfully in capturing some of the most notorious serial killers of all time, like Ted Bundy, Wayne Williams, and the Green River Killer. On the night of the 29th, a friend of Richard's came to visit him after hearing about his heroic act. The guard made lasagna and even drew a diagram of the sound and light tower as they delved into a deep discussion about the tragedy. But unbeknownst to Richard, his friend was wired. He was working with the FBI to see if Richard would reveal anything incriminating. Then came Kathy Scruggs, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter known for having sources inside the police force. She caught wind of the FBI's sudden interest in the hero guard. At first, her sources had asked her to keep the story on hold. But on July 30th, when she called the Atlanta police, the response was different. "They are looking at the security guard. We are over here talking about it. Everyone knows it." That statement led her to believe that it was common knowledge among the cops and could be revealed to the public. So, to be the first, she published the story without any official permission, a hasty decision that would have severe consequences. That day, around 3:30 p.m., while Richard was on his way back to his mother's apartment on Buford Highway, the Atlantic Journal headline hit. When he arrived, Richard found himself surrounded by an unusually large number of reporters gathered outside their home. One shouted, "Do you think you are a suspect?" Jewel laughed it off. "I know they'll investigate anyone who was at the park that night. That includes you all, too," he casually said. He didn't bother to turn on the television that day. By mid-afternoon, the crowd of reporters had almost doubled in size, and Richard had no clue why. Finally, at 4 p.m., Anthony Davis, the head of the security company Jewel worked for, called him. "Have you seen the news?" he asked, to which Jewel said, "No." "They are saying you are a suspect," Anthony said, getting straight to the point. But just like before, Richard tried brushing it off and was cut by Anthony's warning. "They are zeroing in on you. To keep the publicity down, don't go to work." A knock on the door minutes later brought it all to his doorstep. 2 FBI agents, Don Johnson and Dieter Rosario, were standing outside with a disarming friendliness. They casually asked him to come to headquarters to help them make a training film for Quantico. Despite the mass of reporters outside and Anthony's warning, Jewel believed the agents and agreed to go. He drove his own truck to the FBI's Buckhead headquarters. Along the way, he noticed 4 cars tailing them. When Richard arrived, he told the agents that the press is on us. Don simply corrected him, saying, "Those are our guys." At headquarters, Dieter, known for his skills as a negotiator, began asking Richard questions under the guise of filming the supposed training video. After an hour, Don stepped out of the room, and when he returned, his tone was rushed. "Let's pretend that none of this happened. You're going to come in and start over. And by the way, we want you to fill out this waiver of rights." That's when Richard finally felt something wasn't right. This couldn't be for a training film. They wanted to record him wavering off his Miranda rights. He hesitated, asking if he could call his lawyer first. The agent's friendly demeanor from before disappeared in an instant. "What do you need to contact your attorney for? You didn't do anything. We thought you were a hero. Is there something you want to tell us about?" asked Don. Richard tried calling Watson Bryant, his decade-old lawyer friend from the Federal Disaster Relief Agency, where Richard once worked as a mailroom clerk. Back then, people had nicknamed him Radar because of his uncanny ability to anticipate their needs, always ready with a file or even a Snickers bar. Now, desperate, he tried calling Watson's office and even Watson's parents, but no one was picking up. Coincidentally, Watson saw a giant screen flashing his old friend Richard's face on his way home. He immediately called FBI headquarters from his car, demanding to speak with Richard. The operator flatly said, "He is not here." Watson didn't buy that. Once he got home, he checked his home phone and found several pleading voicemails from Richard. Watson's assistant, Nadia Light, told him to call *69, and the number that came back confirmed his suspicions: 679-9000, FBI headquarters. Richard was there. He quickly called them again, only for the operator to say that Richard couldn't come to the phone. He was in an interview, but Watson was persistent, and finally, after a few tense exchanges, he got Richard on the phone. The security guard began to explain the situation with the fake training film, but the lawyer interrupted him. "You idiot! You are a suspect! Get your ass out of there now!" When Richard got up to leave, the agents tried to insist that he stay, but since there was no warrant, they had no choice but to let him go. At home, the situation didn't get any better. That evening, his mom's favorite news anchor, Tom Brokaw, looked into the camera on NBC Nightly News and delivered a chilling statement. "The FBI is saying they probably have enough to arrest him right now, probably enough to prosecute him, but you always want to have enough to convict him as well, so it remains to be seen." All color drained from his mom's face. She turned towards Richard, her eyes brimming with tears. "Son, what have you done?" Richard sat helplessly, unable to find any words that would console his sobbing mother. When Watson arrived at the Jewels' apartment late that night, the place was already suffocating with humidity and the swarm of reporters outside. He entered the house and pulled Richard aside, drawing him away from his mom's questioning gaze. "I want to know if you can tell me, without any hesitation at all, if you had anything to do with the bombing." Richard stared his friend in the eye and firmly denied any involvement with the attack. "Richard, these people want to kill you. I cannot help you unless you tell me the absolute, unequivocal truth." Watson pressed again. But every time Watson pushed, Richard's answer remained the same, that he had nothing to do with the bombing. The lawyer had no choice but to believe his friend. Watson left the house at 10:30 p.m., only to receive a call at midnight. A shaky Richard on the other side described the growing insanity. "They are massing outside the apartment, Watson." Watson Bryant was hardly the kind of lawyer anyone would expect at the center of a national spectacle. He wasn't even a criminal defense attorney. Most of his experience came from small-scale real estate cases. Naturally, as someone who was almost invisible in the legal circle, his participation in such a high-profile case was met with a series of questions, starting with, "Who the hell is Watson Bryant?" By the next morning, Watson was already on the front lines, facing the dozens of reporters shoving a mic at his face whenever they could. Almost every paper in the country had plastered the Atlantic Journal story about Richard on its front page. 10,000 journalists had arrived in Atlanta, and the FBI's focus was now locked squarely on Richard. Richard's cell phone was blowing up with around 100 calls each day. Someone had even posted his mom's cell number on the internet, which meant she was getting the worst of it, with over 1,000 calls a day. Both of them had no choice but to change their numbers. By 10 a.m. on July 31st, when Watson came back to Richard's apartment, he walked straight into a swarm of federal agents. They had a search warrant in hand, which came sooner than anyone expected. And they had a condition. Richard was to leave his own home while the agents tore it apart. Watson immediately called the FBI headquarters. "What the hell is this? Why can't he be there?" But it was evident that in the FBI's eyes, Richard was less a suspect and more a fugitive, and they wanted the entire world to know it. An army of about 40 federal agents flooded the small apartment complex, equipped with dogs and specialized teams, bomb squad in light blue, evidence techs in dark blue, and ATF agents in red and yellow. Watson looked around at the spectacle and muttered, "This is like damn Six Flags over Georgia." Watson had to leave while they were searching, to make good on a promise he had made to his daughter to see the Olympic equestrian competition. Before leaving, he warned Richard, "Don't do anything stupid. Just shut up and let them do what they have to do." As hours passed, Richard had to use the restroom, but the conditions under which he was allowed back inside were that he wear rubber socks and gloves, so he wouldn't contaminate his own home. He heard a crash in the bedroom and demanded to know what they'd broken, but the agents simply brushed him off. Richard described how this made him feel. "How would you like to know that 12 different guys had been in your underwear, laid it out on the floor, probably walked on it, and then folded it back up like nothing ever happened and put it in your drawer?" When Richard's mother returned home, she found her precious kitchen turned upside down. Every spice, cracker, and dog biscuit had been scooped from its container and dumped into sterile FBI bags. It broke her heart, but all she could do was quietly retreat to the bedroom. There, she began washing clothes while weeping, as if scrubbing the fabric could erase the humiliation. When Watson drove back from the equestrian events, he heard the live coverage of the FBI raid on the radio. His little daughter, Meredith, looked at him and asked the same question that had been in everyone's mind. Why are you helping this guy if he's guilty? The next morning, Watson was handed the FBI's official inventory list of all the items they had seized. His eyes froze on one line. One hollowed-out hand grenade, ball-shaped. One hollowed-out hand grenade, pinecone-shaped. He spun toward Richard. What the hell is this? They're paperweights. I bought them at a military store, Richard said. After the search, Richard hid inside his house for days from the hundreds of paparazzi camped outside. Some reporters had even rented rooms in the apartments across the street just to keep an eye on Richard and his mother at all times. The pair survived on the ham omelets dropped off by a neighbor and lasagna leftovers. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape the camera's flashing lights and large sound dishes, which amplified sounds to listen into the home. Richard was convinced that every word they said was being recorded and would become the next front-page headline. They had a sound dish. They had a person writing down everything we said. I saw them. So whenever he needed to share updates about the case with his mother, he would scribble them on scraps of paper. One journalist always remained on the hill opposite their apartment, binoculars glued to their eyes. Every time old Richard's mom even dared to step out, people shouted at her. That Saturday, just after noon, Richard's phone rang. It was an unknown number, which was strange since only a few necessary people had his new contact. This particular call was to inform him that FBI agents would be coming by to collect DNA, hair, and handwriting samples, part of what they described as standard procedure. Just as Richard hung up, Watson pulled up to his apartment and went straight up to him, ignoring the reporters. His mom wasn't home that afternoon, and Richard was hoping that she wouldn't return until the agents left. Around late afternoon, the agents knocked on the door. They carried a warrant that listed 25 pulled hairs and 25 combed hairs to get a DNA sample. Richard had no choice in the matter. He sat at his mother's round holiday table, where a portrait of him in his deputy's uniform hung on the front wall. The FBI medic combed sections of Richard's thick auburn hair and leaned in with tiny drugstore tweezers. Richard sat there, almost stone cold, as the agents pulled his hairs one by one. Afterwards, using his mother's kitchen table as a makeshift workstation, they rolled his palms and fingers onto inked cards, leaving dark smudges across the table's surface. Then, they asked Richard to sit on the sofa and recite the bomber's 911 call 12 times. There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes. That particular request didn't sit well with Watson, worried that the tape would be spliced, twisted, and used against his client. The lawyer cut it off immediately. Not today. Not happening. After the entire ordeal was done, Richard barely spoke the rest of the day. The only thing he was grateful for was that luckily his mom didn't come home to see him in such a vulnerable state. Watson, on the other hand, had something else on his mind. So far, he had been the loyal attorney and friend, navigating through the increasing pressure by himself. But watching Richard face the FBI's continuous invasive procedures made him realize that they needed more help. As the closing ceremony for the Olympic Games drew near, the lawyer was suspicious that the FBI might feel pressured to make a public show of progress, even if it meant filing premature charges against Richard. Time was running out, so, despite Richard's deep mistrust of criminal defense lawyers, Watson set out to get one. He found Jack Martin, a Harvard-trained death penalty expert with deep ties to the U.S. Attorney's Office and one of the best criminal defense lawyers in Georgia. That same weekend, as a counterattack to the FBI's potential arrest, Watson prepared a polygraph test. He got in touch with a former federal prosecutor who had tested notorious bombers before and arranged a private session at his office. When they finally carried out the test, the results were unexpected. It read, inconclusive. The former prosecutor who conducted the test suggested it could be because Richard was nervous, but everyone was taken aback, especially Watson. Had his old friend been lying to him the entire time? So, the legal team pressed on for a second test, and finally, after waiting for 12 hours in Watson's office, the results showed no deception. Even though the polygraph result wasn't going to be submitted as legal evidence, Watson hoped it could convince the FBI, or at least the media, that Richard had nothing to hide. That hope didn't last long. Within days, families of the two blast victims, including the widower of Alice Hawthorne, filed lawsuits against Richard. Watson had expected it to happen eventually, but not now. They now needed a civil rights lawyer to fight off those claims and buy more time for Richard. That's when Lynn Wood and Wayne Grant entered the picture, two fiery Atlanta trial lawyers with a reputation for taking on the press. They teamed up with Jack Martin, who led the criminal defense side of Richard's case, while Wood and Grant handled the civil and media battles. But that wouldn't be enough. It was clear the media was getting out of control. Even Richard's polygraph, which was supposed to remain confidential, was leaked to CNN. Instead of helping his case, the leak only fueled public speculation that he was still under suspicion. Only 3 days after the civil rights lawyers came on board, a van with tinted windows arrived at the Macy's parking garage directly facing the office of Lynn Wood and Wayne Grant. It didn't move for 10 days, and Lynn was convinced that van had laser sound detecting equipment. The moment the lawyers set up a camera by the window to record it, the van suddenly pulled out of the garage and disappeared. But then, another issue surfaced. The FBI claimed they had found solid evidence against Richard, saying that pieces of the park's blown-up fence were allegedly discovered among his belongings. When AJC's Kathy Scruggs asked about it on the telephone, Watson told her it was souvenirs of the bombing. Kathy later published her own version of the quote as, "Yes, he did have a sample of the blown-up bomb." The story spread rapidly across major networks. CNN and even Crossfire echoed the claim, each adding their own spin. The guy was seen with a homemade bomb at his home a few days before. Though CNN later issued an apology and Watson criticized Kathy on local radio, it was too late. The New York Post called him a village Rambo and a fat, failed former sheriff's deputy. Even late-night comedians joined in. Jay Leno went as far as mocking him on The Tonight Show. What is it about the Olympic Games that brings out big, fat, stupid guys? Watson was done, seeing all the relentless reporting. Within just 3 weeks, there were around 110,000 stories about Richard on the internet, almost all of them negative. Watson told his brother, "I know I am going to sue someone, I just don't know who." One night, he had an idea. He took his assistant, Nadia, to Centennial Park and timed his walk from the sound tower to the payphone which had been used to call in the bomb. It was 6 minutes. The bomber had placed that call at 12:58 a.m., and Richard was next to Tom Davis when they alerted the Centennial Command Center at 12:57 a.m. Richard couldn't have made that phone call. Watson didn't have to just trust that his friend was innocent any longer. Finally, he had definitive proof Richard wasn't the bomber, or so he thought. When Watson brought this fact to the authorities, they didn't see it as evidence at all. The FBI had already considered the time difference and came up with a counter-theory based on a rumor that Richard, quote, was a homosexual. According to them, Richard must have placed that pack in Centennial Park while his male partner phoned in the 911 bomb threat. And the basis for this theory came from a rumor they had heard at Piedmont College, spread by a few students who had harbored a grudge against Richard. The FBI started to treat that rumor as a fact and zeroed in on Richard's few friends, starting with Chris Simmons, a soft-spoken senior at Piedmont. One afternoon, while Chris was working at a video store, 3 agents cornered him. They grilled him with invasive questions. Was he a homosexual? Did he use the internet, since they suspected the bomber might have learned to build explosives online? Would you wear a wire against Richard? Chris, staying loyal to Richard, refused to wear the wire. They then pressured him to take a polygraph, which he ended up passing. By early August, the Olympics drew to a close without any announcements from the FBI about the bomber's capture, which was something Watson feared all along. The case was stalling, and by late August, when the media coverage cooled down slightly, Richard cautiously started leaving the apartment, usually to visit family friends. But by then, the investigators' cars followed him everywhere, and when he was out in open places where cars couldn't follow, low-flying planes monitored him from above. He was being handled like a national fugitive, and the FBI had yet to provide any actual basis for that treatment. By September, they targeted Richard's friend Dave Duchess as the possible caller. The agents surrounded him next to his fiancée, Beatty, at McDonald's and caused a public scene by calling them suspects. It was clear that these feds weren't just tormenting Richard now, they were harassing everyone he was close with. That was the limit of the security guards' prolonged tolerance. Lynn and Wayne, the civil rights lawyers, both agreed that it was time to fight back against this belligerent witch hunt. They came up with a plan. Richard's mother, Bobby, would hold a press conference during the Democratic convention and directly address President Bill Clinton. The day before she was to appear behind the mic, Wayne tried preparing her for the conference, but she was already at her limit. And all that pent-up frustration and sadness came out during her big appearance. Bobby spoke not as a media figure, but as a mother. "My son has no life. He is a prisoner in my home." She described the harassment and fear that had taken over their lives. "We wake up to photographers. We go to sleep with photographers. We cannot look out the windows. We cannot walk our dogs without being followed down the sidewalk." Bobby cried while explaining that their resident manager was threatening to terminate their lease. Richard couldn't even attend a friend's funeral because the FBI and press followed him everywhere. "They have taken all privacy from us. They have taken all peace." The growing tensions had put a notable strain on her bond with her only son. He was under incredible mental pressure, and when Bobby would ask him about the case, he would snap, "Mother, just shut up." At night, she had to be cautious while crying on her bed, thinking the reporters who had rented the front apartment for $1,000 a night were recording her. Then came the part that mattered the most. "I am asking the president for help as the head of the Justice Department and the FBI." Bobby's voice rang through the room. "If the FBI does not intend to charge my son, please tell us. Please tell the world." Although a few people insisted that the crying was staged, the counterattack worked. Bobby's heart-wrenching cries touched the hearts of many, and they received multiple interview requests. The increasing sympathies towards Richard put enormous pressure on the investigators to either provide solid evidence or leave Richard alone. It had been 2 months since the bombing, and Richard's team had been battling with the U.S. Attorney Kent Alexander, trying to find a way to bring the ordeal to an end. Finally, they agreed on a deal. Kent wanted Richard to undergo a voluntary 6-hour interrogation. If the agents present in the meeting were satisfied, the Justice Department would finally issue a statement clearing his name. But after being on the receiving end of Washington's tricks for so long, Richard was skeptical to say the least. But on October 6th, Richard, along with his criminal defense lawyer, Jack Martin, finally sat down in front of the 2 investigators, Larry Landers of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and FBI Special Agent Bill Lewis, for the lengthy interview. There were aerial photos of Centennial Park pinned to the wall and, for some reason, a park bench hauled in as a prop. As expected, the interrogation was grueling. The questions ranged from, had Richard picked up any pieces of pipe when the park was under construction, to, had he told anyone, take my picture now, because I am going to be famous? Richard insisted none of this had happened. The only thing he recalled ever saying was that he was heading to Atlanta and would be caught up in that mess down there, which was a comment about traffic, not the tragedy that followed. They pressed him for precise times. When he saw those drunk college kids who were littering, when he took bathroom breaks, and when he checked the tower. Richard eventually threw up his hands. "I don't go through my life looking at my watch. I don't care about time. When the bomb went off, I did not look at my watch." 6 hours later, Richard denied everything for the last time. "I had nothing to do with it. I don't know anything about that bomb. And if I did, I'd be the first to drag the bastard to your door." After an extensive and invasive interview, it was clear at that point that the Bureau had nothing on him. They finally believed him. There was no public acceptance or apology. The authorities made no effort to restore Richard's reputation, which they had so elaborately tarnished. Innocent until proven guilty is only for the courts. For the public, and apparently sometimes the FBI, it has often been guilty until proven innocent. After 88 long days of being America's prime suspect, the only thing the Jewels got was a letter sent to Watson Bryant. Based on the evidence developed to date, your client, Richard Jewell, is not considered a target of the federal criminal investigation into the bombing on July 27, 1996 at Centennial Olympic Park. Barring any newly discovered evidence, this status will not change. Soon after, the Bureau returned what they had seized from Richard's apartment. But the way it was done felt less like closure and more like mockery. They just dumped it there. There was permanent marker scrawled across everything. His mother's Tupperware containers, the spice racks, dog treats, even family photo albums. Richard soon filed defamation lawsuits against NBC, Piedmont College, and especially the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, it was their turn to pay. Literally. NBC was among the first to settle quietly. Reports later suggested they paid out more than $500,000 after Tom Brokaw's on-air remarks helped fuel the hysteria. The New York Daily News even ran a headline that read, "Brokaw goofed and NBC paid." While Richard got busy with his lawsuits, the Olympic bombing case grew cold with no additional leads. The FBI had just spent the past 3 months pointlessly chasing the wrong guy, and it would cost innocent people their lives. In 1998, almost 2 years after the Olympic Park bombing, the authorities were given a fatal wake-up call. Since Jewell was finally excluded as a suspect, they thought the bomber had gone into hiding, when, in reality, he was simply plotting his next attack. Several of them. The morning of January 29th began quietly at the New Women All-Women Healthcare Clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, an abortion clinic. Emily Lyons, a nurse who had been at the facility for a long time, was surprised by how quiet it was that day. Normally, protesters were part of her routine. They'd stand outside, yelling and chanting, expressing their outrage for abortions. At first, it used to upset Emily, but over the years, seeing how grateful her patients always were, it made it all worthwhile. But this morning, it was calm. No protesters, no angry chanting, no chaos. But this peace would not last long. A patient and her father pointed out an unusually large flower pot sitting outside, just a few feet away from the clinic's front door. Emily didn't recall anyone putting it there, so she asked the clinic's security guard to investigate. Robert Sanderson, or Sandy as everyone called him, was a Birmingham cop moonlighting as a security guard at the clinic. With a nightstick in hand, he was carefully examining the pot, completely unaware of the man watching him from across the street. That man pressed a button, and the pot blasted into pieces, sending out a shockwave. It killed the security guard instantly, and sent Emily flying across the ground as shrapnel hit her. Patients screamed, many were left wounded, and a deep crater in the lawn was all that remained of the flower pot. Dozens of cops from the city, state, and federal agencies rushed to the site, and the news called it America's first deadly bombing at an abortion clinic. The cops searched the area for clues, but they didn't find anything useful that could lead to a suspect. As investigators spread out, authorities quickly circulated an alert urging nearby residents to look out for anything suspicious. Not far from the chaos, Jeremiah Hughes, a UAB pre-med student, was sitting in his dorm's laundry room when he heard the explosion echo through Birmingham. But there, one man stood out, walking away calmly. He found the man's behavior strange and decided to see where the stranger was going. Jeremiah got into his car and deliberately got ahead of the man to catch his appearance, and then he turned towards the nearby McDonald's to dial 911. Coincidentally, an attorney, Jeffrey Tikal, was enjoying his breakfast there when he heard Jeremiah describing a man to the cops. Curiosity kicked in, so the lawyer stepped outside, still holding the coffee he was drinking, and sure enough found the man matching the description 40 to 50 yards away. When the suspicious man veered off the sidewalk and disappeared into the tree line, his lawyer instincts kicked in. Jeffrey jumped into his car and drove in the same direction, tailing the suspicious man from a distance. Little did Jeffrey know, Jeremiah also had the same idea, but the pre-med student took a different route. After driving for half a mile, Jeffrey spotted a truck parked in a distant parking area. He observed a figure emerge from the woods and place gear into the back of the vehicle. It was the same suspicious man, who then got into the truck and pulled out into Valley Avenue. Jeffrey continued to follow him, and as soon as the man stopped at a red light, Jeffrey scrawled the truck's plate number onto his coffee cup, KND 1117. At that exact time, Jeremiah, who made his way to the same intersection, spotted the truck too. And then, something happened that made Jeffrey stop. He was looking at me, looking at him. Then, the lights changed, and the man drove off with his truck. Jeffrey immediately took a turn towards a nearby police station, clutching that coffee cup with the hastily scribbled numbers. Jeremiah also called the police again, giving them the same license plate number. Meanwhile, inside the clinic, Nurse Emily had narrowly escaped death. The blast took one of her eyes and left her body riddled with burns and shrapnel wounds. Over the next 7 years, she would undergo 57 surgeries to recover. She described her experience. "Every day that I get up, it's an effort to get out of bed. But scars just tell people you were stronger, because not much intimidates you once you've been blown up." When investigators ran the plate through their system, they saw it belonged to a former U.S. Army-trained survivalist, someone who had once belonged to the 101st Airborne Division in Kentucky and was discharged a year later for smoking marijuana. It said he lived in the small Appalachian town of Murphy, North Carolina. The FBI got a search warrant and raided the suspect's properties, but he was nowhere to be found. The authorities assumed he had fled into the mountains, since he grew up in the area and knew those woods well. During their search of one of his storage sheds, they found similarly marked flooring nails as the ones found at the abortion clinic, a cutting machine, pipes, and bomb-making materials, including wires and explosives. While the forensic team worked on collecting evidence behind the scenes, the authorities visited the suspect's family. They claimed he was innocent, but the FBI wasn't convinced and kept the family under surveillance. The authorities learned that the suspect had developed an obsession with extremist far-right ideologies. He had a history of drifting in and out of white supremacist groups, and had even attended Christian identity movements as a teenager. These Christian identity campaigns were promoting a pseudo-religious ideology, teaching that white people were God's chosen race. During the time he lived with his mother, they would regularly attend the Church of Israel, known for having the same extremist views. Forensic teams had already linked components from the Birmingham clinic bomb to materials found in his storage shed. With the situation escalating, the FBI made a decisive move. On May 5, 1998, a little over 3 months after the clinic bombing, the FBI officially changed him from a suspect to a culprit by adding his name to the 10 most wanted fugitives list. He was considered armed and extremely dangerous, and a reward of up to $500,000 was placed for any information that would help get a conviction, and a bounty of about $1 million if the intel led to the culprit's arrest. The investigation had grown into a massive joint effort. The Southeast Bomb Task Force, made up of the FBI, ATF, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Alabama Bureau of Investigation, Birmingham Police, and the Justice Department prosecutors, all worked together in full force. They interviewed thousands of witnesses and traced nearly every component of the Birmingham bomb. The collected evidence was strategically sent to prosecutors in Atlanta, Birmingham, and North Carolina, with the assistance of numerous other states and local law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Treasury Undersecretary for Enforcement even called the teamwork a tremendous model of cooperation. But cooperation alone wasn't going to catch the bomber. After several months of dead ends, agents on the ground still continued to comb through the rugged Nantahala National Forest in western North Carolina, where the criminal was suspected to be hiding. Although they received multiple reports of sightings, most of them were dead ends. The last credible sighting was in July 1998, reported by George Nordman, a health food store owner in Andrews, North Carolina. He said that the fugitive had come to his home asking for food and supplies, to which he agreed at first. But after thinking it over for a while, George backed out. A few days later, George came home to find his truck and more than 75 pounds of food missing. There were 5 $100 bills laid out on the table as if in payment. However, sometime later, that truck was found abandoned in the woods with a note written by the bomber asking it to be returned to its owner. After that, a number of break-ins were reported in the mountain cabins of the area, with residents complaining that food and men's clothing were stolen from their homes, but none of those reports provided any solid lead. As the amount of sightings decreased, it wasn't the forest that delivered the next major lead. It was the forensic labs. For months, the forensic team had been analyzing the materials found in the bomber's storage shed to see if they matched evidence from earlier bombings. The 1.5-inch flooring nails, which were each cut by hand, had tiny scars left by the cutting machine in the culprit's shed. It was as distinctive as a fingerprint. As the police suspected all along, they matched nails from different attack sites. Turns out, the criminal had been carrying out attacks for nearly 2 years before that January 1998 morning at the clinic. 7 months before, on February 21, 1997, he had struck at the Other Side Lounge, which was a popular gay nightclub in Atlanta. The bomb tore through the crowded venue, injuring 5 people, and dozens more were left in shock. But miraculously, no one was killed. And just a month earlier than the nightclub explosion, on January 16, 1997, there was a bombing at another abortion clinic, the Northside Family Planning Services Clinic in Atlanta. A bomb was planted near the entrance as well. There were 2 explosions, though. The first one damaged the building, causing chaos and confusion, but fortunately, no serious injuries. And when the rescue crews and police rushed in to evacuate the area, a second device packed with nails detonated. The second explosion injured at least 4 people. And then the materials analyzed also linked him to the Centennial Park Olympic bombing in 1996. The earlier bombings weren't originally connected to each other by the investigators because they were seen as hate crimes with individual motives, and each instance was handled locally. On October 14, 1998, 10 long months after the culprit showed up on their radar, the Justice Department formally charged him with the 4 bombings, officially making him the face of the Olympic Park bombing, rather than the security guard who had saved so many from it. Attorney General Janet Reno released a statement that day. "We are going to keep searching until we find him." That vow set in motion one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in U.S. history. For the next 5 years, the Southeast Bomb Task Force poured millions of dollars and tens of thousands of man-hours into searching the mountains of western North Carolina. Sometimes, there were as many as 200 agents combing the whole 517,000 acres of the Nantahala National Forest. The area was riddled with rugged terrain and thousands of abandoned mines, ranging from simple 50-foot deep holes to vast underground networks. Many of those mines were uncharted, meaning only someone familiar with the land could navigate their way around them. Someone like the bomber. But despite the authorities' relentless efforts, weeks turned into months, and months into years. Still, there was no sign of the fugitive. Many agents within the task force, like the retiring ATF director John McGaugh, began wondering whether he was even alive. But a bomb task force supervisor and previous GBI agent, Charles Stone, believed that he was still alive. Charles told CNN, he probably had one central hiding place that, for lack of a better term, would be a main camp. Then he probably had multiple spike camps. Those secondary camps would not be as well equipped as the main camp, but would have enough supplies and space for him to live for a number of days. And then, finally, after half a decade of theories, The hunt finally came to an end, and it was all by chance. On May 31st, 2003, at around 4 a.m., a rookie Murphy police officer named Jeffrey Scott Postel was on routine patrol when he spotted a man crouched behind a Save-A-Lot grocery store. The man ran after seeing the cop and hid behind some milk crates. The officer thought he had caught a random burglar. When the officer pulled out his weapon and ordered the man to come out, the man complied. Deputies arrived shortly after as backup. But when one of them, Sean Matthews, took a hard look at the suspect, his face went pale. It was him. It was the bomber. After 5 grueling years, America's most wanted fugitive was caught, wearing a pair of blue work pants, a dark blue shirt, jogging shoes, and a camouflage jacket, and carrying a backpack with some miscellaneous items inside, along with a large flashlight, reported Murphy Police Chief Mark Thigpen. He was only miles away from where he was last spotted almost 5 years ago, back in July 1998 by George Nordman, the health food store owner, indicating that he had been in the area the whole time, according to Cherokee County Sheriff Keith Lovin. That Saturday night, the terrorist was held in the Cherokee County Jail. He was going to appear in court at 10 a.m. on Monday in Asheville, North Carolina. There were multiple charges against him, many of which could lead to the death penalty. The entire process from his capture to the final verdict took 2 years because in 2005, instead of going through multiple trials and possibly facing execution, he agreed to a plea bargain. He would avoid the death penalty if he admitted to the 4 bombings and revealed where he had hidden 250 pounds of dynamite in the mountains of North Carolina. And sure enough, the authorities found several bomb parts and even a fully assembled bomb in western North Carolina, some near homes and small businesses around Murphy. On April 13, 2005, the culprit entered his plea to the courts in Birmingham and Atlanta, justifying his terrorist activity as acts of anti-abortion and anti-gay terrorism, and that his choice to plead was a tactical decision, not an admission of moral legitimacy from the government. What's strange is that the terrorist had attacked a gay nightclub due to his radical homophobic views, yet the bomber's own brother was gay, and he seemed okay with that. On July 18, 2005, in Birmingham, the terrorist was finally sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for the 1998 abortion clinic bombing and the murder of security guard Robert Sanderson. Later, on August 22, 2005, he was further sentenced in Atlanta for the 3 bombings he committed there and received additional life terms without parole. That exact day, when the final verdict was announced, the criminal was shipped to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison. There, he remains locked down for 23 hours a day, alone in an 80-square-foot concrete cell. As the real culprit behind the Centennial Park bombing was brought to justice, things began to look up for the original suspect, Richard Jewell. He finally achieved his lifelong dream of wearing the badge and became a sworn police officer in 1997 at the Lutherville Police Department. It's inspiring that he never let the ordeal break his spirit. Even after being tormented by the FBI and the press, Richard still believed in the principles of law enforcement. When the real culprit was captured in 2003, Watson told the news to Richard, who went silent upon hearing it. 4 years later, in 2007, Richard passed away from a heart attack at the ripe age of 44. His mother, Bobby, who was left alone, would console herself by babysitting Watson's 2 sons every Saturday. Turns out the lawyer ended up marrying his assistant, Nadia Light, and they all eventually made peace with what they had been through. This entire story of the Centennial Park bombing wasn't just about Richard's exoneration or the actual criminal's violence. It's about us. It was a reminder that when the media chases speed for the sake of being first, it often fails to deliver the actual truth. The media turned a hero into a villain overnight, showing that in the public eye, people are often guilty until proven innocent. And when the authorities fixate more on saving face than justice, it can allow the real perpetrators to roam free for years. It makes you wonder, if they hadn't fixated on Richard, could they have caught the real bomber before he had struck again? Nearly 3 decades later, not much has changed. There are still witch hunts built on speculation and outrage shaping headlines before facts can catch up, especially in the age of the internet where theories are treated as fact without any proof. People's reputations can be torn apart with just a few strokes of a keyboard. Richard Jewell's story reminds us that justice and truth demand patience, and that the cost of getting it wrong not only ruins lives, but it can be fatal. If you found this video interesting and would like to help it get it noticed by the algorithm, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Another way you can help is by checking out another one of our videos, like this one about the deadliest woman in World War II and how she was able to kill over 300 Nazis. Speaking of support, thank you to our top tier members, Nexus, Border Lodge, Cassie, Xander, Monica Sleepstreamer, and all our other generous members at stack.com/brew for helping to keep this channel going.